Hey, what's up everyone? This is James Jesso from Adventures Through the Mind, and I want to talk to you today a little bit about ketamine, actually. To be clear, I'm telling you this because I think it's important to have very real, very open, honest discussions about drugs in general, and the suppression of those discussions by way of, for example, limiting their visibility or just generally banning access to them, or trying to discourage their use by demonetizing them, whatever it might be. This is actually a defective model of suppression and is part of the problem of why so many people are damaged by drugs is a lack of education, which comes out of basically curating certain information to be suppressed because it's not in alignment with the current cultural, moralistic narratives around drugs. So I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to talk about it openly, and I'm not going to glorify it, but I'm not going to make it sound like it's all that horrible inherently, because all of that is just a bunch of bullshit. Anyways, ketamine. Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic that works on the glutamate neurotransmitter system and effectively disconnects the lived experience of the mind from the physical sensations of the body. And anesthetic, dissociative in the sense that it separates the mind from the body, but doesn't necessarily shut the mind off like other anesthetics would. Some people like to call it a horse tranquilizer or an animal tranquilizer, or K is for horses, or just say nay to K. But the reality is that although ketamine is used in veterinary medicine, ketamine is probably the safest anesthetic in medicine and is a staple emergency medicine all over the world because it is cheap and it is safe. Its role as being a veterinary medicine really has more to do with the stigmas around giving people psychoactive or like psychedelic type experiences in medicine, because that's a no-no, and also because of just general ignorance amongst the subculture. Ketamine is used in children, it is used in elderly people, it is the medicine of choice for situations where someone needs to be anesthetized, but you don't want them dying right there in the field, or in the emergency lab. People who are like near death can be given ketamine and it not kill them. Another thing about ketamine is that it can be used in antidepressant treatments, not even just because you're in pain and so you give somebody ketamine and you can operate on them in the field or at the dentist office, but apparently giving people ketamine results in an immediate decline in suicidality. It could be used as an emergency medicine to prevent people from being on suicide risk. Although it only lasts for a few days, and then all the feelings come back. It doesn't resolve anything, it just disconnects it. So ketamine is relatively safe, and it's not a horse tranquilizer, although it is used in veterinary medicine. When you take it, it does produce a very psychoactive effect to varying degrees of intensity, from a little wobble, what's the one saying, like 6 beers on the end of your thumbnail, to full and complete dissociation and immersion in a psychedelic environment, a entire immersion in another realm of existence, totally detached from any physical sensation or association to the context of your physical body. It can be incredibly enjoyable, it can be incredibly frightening, it can be incredibly addictive, which is an interesting bit that I'm going to talk about in a second, and definitely something to be very, very considerate about as we talk about this, is that the risks of addiction with ketamine are, I think, quite high, especially, for anyone, but I think they're higher for psychonauts than psychonauts like to accept. My experience with ketamine has always been insufflation, putting it up my nose. I have not injected it, which is a slippery slope, as I have heard, though I'm not opposed to the experience at some point in time in the future. My experiences with ketamine have been relatively positive, usually, although not all the time, and I'm going to share a story of an experience with ketamine that really sort of felt quite meaningful and important insofar as my usage, because I like ketamine. I really like it. I like it so much that I don't like to have it around. In fact, I will just generally stay away from it as much as possible, because as much as I like it, I don't actually want it in my life. And on top of that, there's the increased risk of fentanyl contamination, which I didn't talk about before. But again, this, like I said before about the suppression of education, I mean, the suppression of drugs in general creates, contamination in the supply line, and then you get people dying from fentanyl when all they wanted to do was do a bump of ketamine, and that's the fault of legislation around prohibition and the suppression of education, not necessarily the fault of the drug or the drug users or the whole capitalistic narrative that supports drug dealing, even. Actually, no, I take that back. The capitalistic narrative that supports drug dealing probably has a lot to do with the emergence of fentanyl. Anyways, my experiences with ketamine, I've always felt like whenever I'm having it, I'm running through a field of daisies. I mean, metaphorically, I don't actually run through a field of daisies. I've only ever gone into the peak psychedelic experience of a K-hole once, possibly twice. I'd say twice. But it feels like I'm running through a field of daisies. Everything is awesome. Life is great. This is so playful and interesting. And I know that there's this dark cloud looming. The storm is coming. And if I don't check out of that field soon, I'm going to get stuck in that storm. And I'm either going to be trapped there for however long the storm ends, which is that the longer I'm in the storm, the longer the storm happens, or the storm is going to straight up kill me. And that storm obviously is a destructive, addictive pattern. So not that long ago, I was in a city and I was visiting a friend there. And when I showed up, the friend was like, I got some ketamine. And I was like, sweet, it's been a while, let's do it. Next thing I know, I'm 3 days of basically doing ketamine most of the time. Little bits here and there, and then a bunch in the evening. And I have no particular need to do anymore. But since we're out on a walk, I decide, sure, let's just keep having it. Let's just do it. It's fun. It's great. Why don't we give it a go? And as I'm doing it, I have just a little bit too much. And all of a sudden, I start to dissociate while I'm walking. And not in a good way, not in like a wobbly kind of way. In a way where like micro sleeps when you're driving exhausted. And for whatever half a second, it's like there's nobody at the wheel. There's nobody at the wheel. And I started to dissociate, and I came to with my friend having grabbed me and saying my name, James, like startled. And 100 different possible scenarios came up, which were terrifying. My whole body went on threat response, trying to figure out, like, holy fuck, am I dying? Are there cops? Like, what's going on? And when I finally come to enough, which maybe is only 2 or 3 seconds, but long enough to just completely immerse my experiential field in this heightened sense of danger, I realized that they had stopped me because I was just about to step in a mostly decomposed corpse of a rabbit. Now, something that's interesting to consider is novelty and synchronicity. And I'm not going to go into an ontological foundation for this, but I will say that it seems interesting how unique and synchronistic experiences, which is to say, experiences that have no seeming connection at all externally, but internally seem to weave into a coherent theme of psychological meaning or potency that tends to emerge when we trip psychedelics. And I mean, I know that ketamine is slightly different psychedelic, but in the sense that it's not serotonergic. But anyways, the rabbit is an interesting meaning for me, as when I was in my early 20s, I was really into New Ageism, and I was doing shamanic journeying courses and all this stuff. And my first encounter with a power animal, which I carried with me for a very long time, was the rabbit. And I understood it to be wisdom and growth and maturity and vitality. And I understood the rabbit symbolically as representing sort of like the best parts of myself. And when I almost stepped on this dead rabbit because I had taken too much ketamine and had just basically checked out, irresponsibly just checked out, and was about to just like basically fall in it, I had the sensation as if the universe was telling me something. And it was telling me, this is the result of your behavior. And it was showing me symbolically. Now, fine, I could have just made that shit up in my head, and it doesn't matter. The point is that it mattered meaningfully to me. And I saw the possible damage represented in me almost stepping in the rotting corpse of this rabbit. Which is to say, here is what you're doing to your fullest potential. And I think this is important to consider because ketamine often gives this sense like, oh, wow, there's something really interesting happening here. Like, I'm being given a secret. I'm being given a code. I'm being given, like, the keygen to the fucking mystery at the source of existence. And I could figure it all out. I could figure out all these ideas. I could, calculate the meaning of existence through the underlying source code algorithms that ketamine is downloading into my consciousness. All I need to do is just take more ketamine. All I need to do is just take more ketamine. And ketamine just reinforces the ideas and reinforces it and reinforces it and reinforces it. And then all of a sudden, we think that we're doing important meditation, but what we're actually doing is creating all these possibly just fucking delusional ideas in our mind that are constructed there to intellectually justify our continued use of an addictive substance. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't something extremely interesting about what happens with ketamine, and in that interesting value, in that interestingness, could be a value, but one has to be very cautious because I think personally that for as much value as ketamine can offer is as much destruction as it can offer if you lose the context, if you lose the means by which I, the larger sense of self, the holistic, self-regulated, adult, in-control self, loses its grip on the ketamine use and then is usurped by the addiction to further intellectualize and justify what will eventually become an extremely destructive and life-degrading usage. Anyways, those are my thoughts on ketamine, at least as it stands so far. I have no particular interest, let me rephrase that, I have interest to do it again, and I simultaneously have no particular interest to do it again anytime soon because I am very conscientious of the possible consequences of that, of using that particular substance. If you have any experiences with ketamine and you would like to talk about them in the comments below and get engaged in discussion about them, please do so either at jameswjesso.com or here on YouTube. And if you liked the video, found it was valuable, please give it a thumbs up. And of course, subscribe to the channel. You could also become my patron on Patreon, which is how this channel is financially funded as I give full time to my research in psychedelics. You could also leave a donation via PayPal or Bitcoin. Links to everything is contained in the description below this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.